right, here we go. It is the NFL Strategy Show, Tuesday, October 8th, 2019. I'm Dave Lochran. With me, as always, on Tuesday, getting the first look at Week 6 is Sal Vetri. We've closed the book on Week 5, maybe the wildest week in fantasy football history, and that's not hyperbole. Like, that probably is the case. And now we've got to flip the page over to Week 6, Sal. It is I'm not going to say a straightforward slate, okay? But we've got 10 games on the main slate. If you're playing on Yahoo Fantasy Draft, you've got 11. They include the Sunday Nighter. But we got 10 games, and I'd say quarterback's pretty straightforward, but running back and wide receiver, even despite having a few less games than usual, they're pretty deep on this slate.
Yeah, I agree. I think I especially agree with wide receiver. I have with 2 less teams, maybe even 3 less teams than most weeks, and I have similar amounts of just wide receiver interest as of right now. But I agree on quarterback. Like when you look at the slate, just as a context, 10 games, so less options in theory overall. But you have that one London game that seems like it would have been good on the main slate because it goes 2 50-plus point total games. Then you get one hovering around like 48, and then the rest are like under 45. So we only have a few pieces of like really fantasy friendly environments for stacking purposes. And then it's sort of like, okay, does one of these just completely break what Vegas is predicting? And it looks like a lot of meh games right now.
Yep. Happy to have all of you with us as always. Spending the week with us on the Strategy Show, man. We bang this out 6 days of the week. You're not going to find this anywhere else. I promise you that much. But of course, we're happy to have you along for the ride. Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports is the sponsor of the NFL Strategy Show. Some sizable contest this week. $300,000 baller, $10 to enter, $30K to first. And you know, the truth is, if you have the time, you want to MME this. They don't have you can't use CSV yet, but putting in multiple entries in one like this where you can't just upload them is a huge advantage. Hell, even if you're only throwing 20, 30 entries in, you crunch them and then you put them in manually, or you make them all by hand. There's definitely ways to get advantages over the field. And we saw it with Adam Scher the other week. He handmade a ton of lineups and had a really great week on Fantasy Draft and Yahoo. But we also make it easy for you to get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points. And that's why we're talking about it right now. You can get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points simply by signing up through us. It's the easiest way to do it. You go to awesemo.com, AWESEMO, and click on, I'll say that, the NFL tab has the primetime games, Showdown Week 5 article right at the top. You will see right towards the top of that article, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports link. You can click on, it's in green writing. You can't miss it. And, of course, our social media guy, Brett, always doing a phenomenal job, is going to drop that link into the YouTube chat now. So get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points, then YSRPs, upon signing up and depositing. And use the sign-up code AWESEMO when you do sign up through our link. And, of course, if you're not looking to MMA, if you're not even looking to get into this $300K baller, there's still $100K guaranteed, $25 to enter, $10K to first. And then the $1 contest, if you're working with a smaller bankroll, $2K to first, $20,000 prize pool. So there's something for everyone here. And there's a no entry fee contest, meaning everything that you pay into the contest comes back to the player. $1,000 to first place, $3 to enter, and zero management fee at all. So get your YSRPs, as good as cash to be used to play, win, and withdraw money on the site by signing up through us at awesemo.com. All right, Sal, now that I'm out of breath, let's get it started. Before we get into the salaries, I'll ask you this much. Any relevant injury news, any news that you think needs to be discussed outside of how bad Baker Mayfield was yesterday?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Hey, you can talk about that too. I'm happy to listen.
No, I was looking, the second half was just, I didn't watch the full second half, but I replayed like the accelerated tape today, and it was just abysmal. They had opportunities, just never capitalizing on them. But yeah, it was bad. I think huge injuries in terms of the main slate right now, at least on the offensive side of it. Nothing stands out in terms of skill position players too much. I think that you have some obvious spots where Jerry Jones right now is feeling optimistic, but who knows what that means on a Tuesday, that he'll have both Tyron Smith and Lyle Collins back for Dak Prescott. That's definitely huge in their matchup with the Jets, just in terms of an offense, just stability there. But yeah, wide receivers and running backs, players came out of the game a little bit nicked up. Guys like Josh Jacobs, guys like Hollywood Brown, but for the most part, they're okay. I guess the big one would be Sammy Watkins and Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill doesn't play last week, but maybe plays this week. Sammy Watkins plays, but once again, injured. And it seems like an injury that might keep him out. So we'll have to track that. Lots of defensive injuries. I think something that we should be tracking throughout the week is the Chiefs' defensive line, because they have a solid matchup versus a really bad offensive line for the Texans. 2 defensive linemen for the Chiefs right now, battling injuries. So I think that's something that's going to be important moving forward. 2 big pieces, too, to their defensive line. You have Williams and Chris Jones.
That was, I mean, if you watched any of that Chiefs game, there's no question that those injuries to the defense affected them heavily. They allowed 180 rushing yards on Sunday night, Sal. And I mean, just all in all, this was one of those games where had the run defense held up a little bit, it would have been entirely different. And the reason I say that, look at the time of possession in the second half of that game. There was a point at one point I was about to tweet it, and then NBC put the graphic up, and I was like, man, they are watching and listening to me through my Amazon Alexa. They had like 19 minutes to 2 minutes time of possession, like midway through the third quarter or through the fourth quarter in the second half. So they just chewed up clock, and we will definitely get to this game, but maybe I'm naive to say Carlos Hyde, in the event that this defense stays banged up, even if they don't, they've been one of the worst run defenses in the league. Carlos Hyde and maybe even Duke Johnson could be a very appealing backfield this week in Kansas City.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I have both guys written down. I have Duke Johnson right now a little bit higher just because game flow says maybe they get behind there. But we know if it's a neutral game script, you're going to see Hyde. That's just what they've stuck with so far through the first 5 weeks. The only other things, I guess, that are worth mentioning for sure is that Mason Rudolph not likely to play next week after what was probably the scariest hit that I've seen and that I can remember for a football player. So it seems like Devlin Hodges is going to suit up. Look good, but it was in mop-up duty for a mobile quarterback that a defense wasn't prepared for. Outside of that, just in terms of defenses, you have Jefferson, the Baltimore defensive back safety. He goes on IR, so Baltimore's defense just continues to take hits.
It does, and we'll, of course, get into that because this is one of those games where while you could definitely see some value coming from Cincinnati, this team is god-awful. You and I are going to go game by game on Thursday, break everything down by game. Usually it takes us about an hour and a half, but it's the best hour and a half you'll ever spend outside of the hour and a half you spent last Thursday morning and the one before that. What do you say we get started with quarterback here and work our way through the positions?
Let's do it, man.
All right. And we always talk snap counts here, carries, targets, touches, routes run. Instead of doing that individually, when we get to those players, we'll hit on it and make sure that we can make this show as informative as possible. Patrick Mahomes was definitely limping. I mean, he did not look like he was in great condition. He still threw for 321 yards, 208 yards at half, but started to unravel. Byron Pringle wasn't enough to get the job done in this game. But of course, like I said, the Indy run game and the lack of run stopping ability from Kansas City had more to do with them losing than Mahomes. But you have him up top. I don't see myself getting to him as much this week. And the only reason for that is there's Watson on the opposite side at almost $1,000 cheaper on DraftKings. Lamar Jackson against Cincy, assuming he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. And then Russell Wilson against Cleveland. We can get into that based on what happens in their secondary as far as injuries goes. Kyler Murray, Matt Ryan, Dak Prescott. These are all guys above 6K, and most of them probably warrant conversation.
Yeah, most of them definitely do. You mentioned Mahomes just being a little bit gimpy. It seems like now back-to-back weeks, you saw an Indy defense that plays primarily zone. They switched to man, and I'm not going to say this is what stops this Chiefs offense, but it's at least men making defenses not break. It's keeping them out of the end zone, and it looks like it's confusing an Andy Reid offense so far. So, yeah, the price tag is just going to probably keep me off of Mahomes. Again, like we say almost every week, if he's like 3% owned, then you just force yourself to get some more because you know the ceiling that he has close to 35, 40 fantasy points probably most weeks. But yeah, I kind of find myself gravitating towards this middle 6K range and really right in the middle of it. So the guy who stands off the page for me is the other side of this with Deshaun Watson. Because of those defensive linemen that we were talking about, I imagine at least one of them is going to miss, and it seems like the injuries are significant. So if both of these players miss, you have an offensive line for Deshaun Watson that's an issue, but he doesn't get sacked last week. It seems to be getting a little bit better, as that's usually what happens over the course of a season as a line's there and can communicate better. And if these guys miss, just more time for Deshaun Watson, who's going to be coming into this one as an underdog. In his career, his splits are a lot better when he's an underdog rather than a favorite and playing from behind. And then Kyler Murray is the one that stands off the page to me, at least. So this is the spot that I look for the most. You don't see it most weeks, but a home underdog that's in a favorable spot. And that's exactly what Kyler Murray has today. We have still yet to see this big ceiling of him putting together a good game through the air, which I guess this weekend was somewhat that, and then a good game on the ground. So he doesn't get in the end zone throwing a touchdown, settles in the 240 passing yard range, has a really good game on the ground with 90 yards and a touchdown. I want to see just putting those two together. You have a clear 30-plus point ceiling there, but the guy's floor is just insane. I mean, the floor is hovering around 18 fantasy points in a matchup now against Atlanta that's just been beaten up. You get 40 pass attempts per game from Murray. So it seems like the 250-point games are the ones where the quarterbacks make the most sense, and I'm probably not going to get away from it as of right now.
I don't think I will either. I'm definitely the thing about Matt Ryan, and we've seen this with him so often this season. This team is bad to the point where he has to throw. He's thrown for 300 yards or more in all 5 games this season. He's got 3+ passing touchdowns in 3 of his last 4. I mean, all in all, you don't need to be on a good team. You need to be you need to have a good amount of passing volume, or you need to be able to do it with your legs. Well, Sal, Matt Ryan this season through 5 games is averaging 44.4 passing attempts per contest. As long as you're chucking it around that much, and we know that there are going to be a ton of possessions on both sides, it makes him a very appealing play alongside Kyler Murray for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, the defense is so bad. And again, injuries against this defense, but bad regardless, that Matt Ryan has to play that route. Like, their offensive line injuries have been holding up a little bit for Ryan, but it's really impacting the running game. And then when you're getting behind by so much, yeah, Matt Ryan in most of these games, he's playing from behind. He's facing softer defenses, softer zones. So that's why you're getting just a career year so far from Austin Hooper. A lot of easier dump offs in zone coverages. But yeah, when you're playing from behind that often and you're forced to throw, like you said, 44 attempts per game, it's going to be great for fantasy. It might not translate. It might seem empty in real life, like you're having failed red zone trips, not getting wins. But for our purposes here, we really don't care too much about that.
No, we don't. And earlier I mentioned it's straightforward at the position. By straightforward, I mean there are, I'd say, a handful of guys that could put up monster numbers. Watson being one of them, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Matt Ryan. I think all of them you could argue that you wouldn't be surprised if they finished as the top fantasy producers at their position this week. When you drop below 6K, though, it definitely thins out a bit. And I think one guy we can talk about, and then we'll get your takes on some of these other quarterbacks, is Kirk Cousins. I can't say I'm excited about Kirk Cousins because the passing volume is really concerning. But this is one of the most, in Philadelphia, one of the most forgiving pass defenses in the league. If you're wondering, oh, well, if they're that bad, Luke Falk should have been able to do something, right? Well, the Eagles just annihilated their offensive line. They came into the week with 3 sacks, dead last in the league. They walked out of the week with 13 sacks on the season. They had 10 sacks against Falk and Fales. They gave them 0 time to throw. They pressured them. They made life miserable. And as I mentioned last week on this very show, they have a stellar run defense. So Le'Veon Bell was given absolutely no room to work with. He averaged fewer than 3 yards per carry, was involved in the passing game, but they sealed off everything on the outside, even when he did catch the ball. I think Kirk Cousins, even though Dalvin Cook is awesome, I think this could be one of those games where he's forced to throw more, but only if Philly can put some points on the board themselves.
Yeah, this is a spot that, I mean, in this price range, it's very attractive and appealing for Cousins, but like you said last week, I mean, Phil couldn't get anything going. When you come into the slate now, the Jets have the second worst adjusted sack percentage, just meaning their offensive line play is terrible when you neutralize it, whereas the Minnesota Vikings are closer to average. So that shouldn't be as much of a concern. But yeah, I mean, the point being here is that you have Dalvin Cook back there. If they stop him like they've done with every other running back so far this year, it's going to put more pressure on Kirk Cousins. Now, that is a real chance Kirk Cousins is going to throw 33% more or higher than he usually does. Now, that doesn't mean it's a huge number. On average, he's throwing 25 times per game. If he throws 33% more, he's throwing 33, which for the most part in the NFL is right around average to around below average. So I think it's an appealing spot. We know what this Philly secondary is, and the talent wide receiver that Minnesota has is definitely going to be beneficial. So I think if you're game planning this game as a Vikings coach, you do game plan to play through the air as long as you have some sort of protection. But like you said, can Philly put points on the board? Just based on what we're seeing from the total right now, I like the spot for Minnesota, 23.5 for them coming into this game as a team total. That's good enough to get me on some Kirk Cousins this week, especially at the price point. But the concern is that, yeah, if this game goes a little bit sideways, Cousins might only throw 26, 27 times, and you're sitting there with stacks of Kirk Cousins, and you're maybe getting 5-6 targets for your wide receivers.
I was surprised to see the Eagles' implied total right now is only at 20.5.
Yeah, I saw that. I was actually surprised to see that Minnesota was a 23.5 favorite here when we know like what they do well. But I guess that's also being just weighted into a good passing game matchup, which maybe gives us a little bit more confidence.
And Deshaun Jackson has been ruled out until at least week 7, which is another pretty big knock for this team. They could use him back to get that, to kind of supercharge that offense, but it hasn't been the case. And he's been out ever since the beginning of week 2. Any other value quarterbacks to discuss here?
So what I have here is I have Gardner Minshew as a maybe right now for me. And I think the biggest thing for me is it's probably going to come down to definitely stacks as it does every week. But the biggest question for me is, do I think DJ Shark is legit? And so far he does seem that, but do I think he beats his matchup with Marshawn Lattimore? Because I think D.D. Westbrook is a great play this week against P.J. Williams in the slot. And then if I think DJ Shark is a good play, and at his price, he seems like a good play, but is it good enough to get me onto full stacks? Because if that's the case, I do think Gardner Minshew has a serviceable and even a good floor to his name with rushing upside. This matchup in the passing game against New Orleans isn't as scary as on the ground for Fournette, and Fournette just running 40-plus routes again last week. So I actually do think Gardner Minshew is in play this week, going to be at home against New Orleans. And what seems like, I believe I saw it open as Jacksonville, a one, just pretty much a pick 'em, but a -1 favorite.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that's it at the position, right? There's really not an incredible amount here. Let me ask you this, and it's early in the week. Many things are still subject to change, of course. But if you had to give me your top 3 quarterbacks right now, regardless of salary, because I don't think any of them are too expensive to where you can't find ways to make it work, who would they be?
I would go Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson, and Matt Ryan.
Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson, Matt Ryan. Yeah, I like that. I'm pretty much on the same page. I'd say, depending on what the injury situation looks like for Cleveland, Russell Wilson could be in play. He's been incredibly good this season, really consistent, and he has a monster ceiling. It's also nice to know that while he's never going to run like he did in 2014, he's already rushed for 120 yards and hasn't been as afraid to use his legs this season. That's a little added element to his game that when he's doing that, he becomes that much more viable from a fantasy standpoint. You want to move on to running back?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Let's start at the top. Let's start with the guys above 8K. Then we'll hit the 7K guys and work our way down. Try and break them down in a bit of a tier fashion here. Ezekiel Elliott is facing the New York Jets. On DraftKings, he's 8,500. He's been fine this season, Sal, but like if you drafted Zeke 3rd or 4th overall in your seasonal leagues, you're not feeling great about this production. He's been okay. And yeah, he's had some difficult matchups. New Orleans stymied that ground game, but Green Bay just got beat to hell by Jordan Howard and Miles Sanders a week before that. And Ezekiel Elliott, while he averaged 5.2 yards per carry, only had 12 attempts, much of this because they were playing from behind. And Aaron Jones was literally in the end zone every time I looked at the TV. Dalvin Cook against Philly, an Eagles team that, despite some serious inadequacies in the passing game defensively, has done a phenomenal job against opposing run games, holding all of them below 90 total rushing yards on the season, and 63 yards per game on the ground. So, how does he do in a matchup like that? And finally, Alvin Kamara against Jacksonville. I think, by the way, Sal, Tampa, and we talked about this before, Tampa continues to prove that their run defense is very good. They held Kamara to 3.9 yards per carry, and he had another relatively disappointing performance when stacked up against Christian McCaffrey. What do we have here at the top tier?
Yeah, so I think Zeke's the one that stands out the most for me in terms of interest. So he's a big favorite here. And last week he was a home favorite, let a lot of people down, but that game goes completely sideways. And I imagine if you don't get Sam Darnold playing this week, it's just going to be very hard for this game script not to go away where Dallas leads the whole time. I thought last week was a okay takeaway from how the game actually ends up turning out. Zeke still finds himself into the end zone. Zeke still catches a couple balls, I think 3 catches last week. So he holds himself, doesn't pay off the price tag, but it wasn't a complete collapse for him. So I like him in this spot against the Jets. I like it even more if Darnold's not playing. Yeah, Dalvin Cook's game flow independent now. So you saw 2 games ago when he had a tough matchup, a lot of people weren't on him. He comes in like sub 5% ownership. Doesn't pay off the price tag, but has a good game because he catches 6 balls. And then last week when they throw even more after wide receivers, the squeaky wheel narrative, he's involved and probably right there with Thielen as being the 2 heaviest involved in the passing game and somebody that Kirk Cousins trusts. So yeah, moving forward, I'm going to have interest in Cook in these spots. It's just a matter of this is a very tough matchup like Chicago. He did everything he could in the passing game 2 weeks ago. And at 8,400, it still wasn't enough to pay it off. Now, sure, he can get in on the ground, and we can say that about a lot of other running backs, but I'm just going to have more interest in Zeke this week and probably Kamara than Cook. I think Cook is still fine to play, game flow independent for sure. It's just a brutal matchup on the ground. When we take into account what he's done in the receiving game the last 2 weeks, it makes him definitely viable moving forward every week. And then Kamara ran, I would imagine it's just because of the game flow, but he only ran 20 routes last week, which was more than 6 less than he has on average so far this season. So I would say a little bit game flow there, but it's a little bit interesting because we've seen him sort of phased out of 2 or 3 of these games in terms of the game script. But he's been, I would say, because maybe Drew Brees being out, but so under the radar. Like he went over 100 total yards and nobody like blinked an eye. Like it was like a bad game for Alvin Kamara because he went for like 105 yards. It's just crazy. So
and also because McCaffrey had such a huge game that overshadowed it for sure.
And I think that's just like the story of the season is McCaffrey's just, if you're not putting up 180 total yards, you're not having a good game. So Kamara, I mean, if he scores a touchdown last week, he just absolutely crushes at the ownership he was at. So I think I prefer Zeke, then Kamara, then Cook. And in this matchup on the road for Kamara, it's obviously a concern, but it's not like they're big underdogs. It's pretty much a pick 'em. And we also know his involvement in the receiving game makes him independent.
Yeah, I really won't even add much to that because I'm with you 100%. Zeke would be the guy here. Could you run into similar issues like they did against Miami where he just wasn't needed? Sure, but I think more times than not, the passing game won't be needed. Zeke has to have, and I don't just say this because it's like, oh, he's due, but Zeke is due for legitimate reasons, not just because he should be. He's played 97 and 93% of snaps over his last 2 games. He's had 3 or more total red zone looks in every game this season. He's involved in the passing game as well. 11 targets over his last 2 games. There are so many reasons to look at someone like Zeke and feel that monster game is coming. So when you factor in that they are 9-point favorites, I think it is, on the road with a 26-point implied total, it only seems reasonable that Zeke has one of these games. But I guess, are you willing to pay for him would be the question. I'm sure neither of us have crunched or made any lineups yet, but are you willing to pay for him preliminarily?
Yeah, I am. And I guess I would just add that, what the tiers we're about to get to, there's a lot of good priced, good matchups for running backs. So I really don't know how much of a priority he is this week.
That's exactly why I'm asking. I said when we were looking at quarterback how there isn't a whole lot to talk about, kind of straightforward. That's a lot different at running back. Let's dive into the 7K. There's only two players here in the $7,000 range on DraftKings. That's David Johnson and Nick Chubb. The problem with David Johnson is that Cliff Kingsbury noted that he might not even play this week, which, of course, in the event that he doesn't, makes Chase Edmonds the chalk of all chalk, and justifiably so. Chase Edmonds is really one of the better backups in the league. He's averaging 6.7 yards per carry this season. Sure, the 37-yarder helped, but in total, he's been very good. He's effective in the pass game as well. So let's talk about David Johnson first here, and feel free to mix in Chase Edmonds in the event that he's out, and then we can get to Nick Chubb against Seattle.
Yeah, so you saw this past weekend, only 70% of the snaps for Johnson. Then it comes out about the back injury. And I was watching that game and I was just I would say curious as to why Edmonds was seeing so many touches. So that definitely explains it, an injury being present. So it seems like right now Johnson's going to be trending to play, but back injuries are tricky. So just monitor that throughout the week. I'm sure Thursday we'll have more information. But if DJ suits up and they're saying, yeah, he practiced fully for a day or two, then I'm going to be pretty confident in playing him at 7,600 and getting a lot out of it. I think the performance that he had this past weekend, I mean, he still goes for what was like 140 plus, 150 plus total yardage in that game. And that's on probably 15% too few snaps. So I think you're getting a discount for this matchup against Atlanta and this game environment on David Johnson for sure. So keep an eye on it. If he practices in full on either Thursday or Friday, I'm going to have a lot of David Johnson. But yeah, if something goes wonky and he tweaks his back and it's worse than they're letting on, then yeah, for $4,600, Chase Edmonds, who saw 12 opportunities last week, 8 carries, had that nice touchdown along the sidelines. And he's looked good. And he was a concern in the preseason if he's going to cut into David Johnson. There's a chance he sees a couple more touches, even if DJ's healthy. But if DJ ends up being out, then yeah, there's a real conversation around 100%ing a guy like Chase Edmonds.
Right. I would have an egregious amount of him, but I'd also be fine with Carlos Hyde's ownership coming down, or maybe Duke Johnson as well, because it would certainly bring it down a little bit. What about Nick Chubb here? There's reasons to be encouraged, right? You know, even in a game where they played from behind for the entire, literally from the first snap for San Francisco, the Cleveland Browns were down. He still had 16 carries. He ran well. Like, if there was one silver lining to take away from that game, Nick Chubb did look good. He averaged 5.5 yards per carry and had 87 yards on 16 attempts, broke a lot of tackles, although it appears he did, I should say, and was actually pretty okay outside of the fact that he didn't find the end zone, and Baker Mayfield was doing everything in his power to make sure the offense did not look okay. Is there any interest in a guy like Nick Chubb here in a game where, by the way, if there's a game that I'm looking to bet, like right now, if I were to put a bet in right now, where would it be? Well, I can tell you, I have trouble believing that I would not be going to the Seattle Seahawks. I think last I looked, they were 3-point dogs. I mean, everything I've seen out of this Cleveland team tells me that they're just not ready for a type of matchup like this. But that's besides the point, Sal. What do you think of Nick Chubb?
Yeah, so your point on the betting, you're on the sharp side of it, because I think it went down to -2 and -1.5 in some spots right now.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
okay.
they already jumped on that. But I think that Nick Chubb, so pricing in the slate context, it's an interesting spot because he's right there next to David Johnson, who I think is in a great spot. Then you get to the guys in the upper 6K range, who I think I prefer this week. But Chubb, yeah, right now is still holding on as a home favorite. We saw how much success he had last week. I think a big thing going forward is last night's game script just got completely out of hand. In general, Baker not playing well, turning the ball over. We know what San Fran was able to do on the ground. So I think that if you see what they did 2 weeks ago and getting back to a lot more 12 personnel, where you just saw a ton of Ricky Seals-Jones on the field, even Farrell Brown, these tight ends that they have, Harris, Demetrius Harris, all these guys were on the field, and they had a ton of success against the Ravens. You see a huge game for Nick Chubb, big run, 3 touchdowns. If they get back to that, which is something that I don't think Freddie Kitchens wants to do in terms of how he wants to run this offense with playmakers like Landry and Odell, but it seemed to work very good. And now that's one game where the Baltimore Ravens defense was a little bit injured. But we saw on the ground Todd Gurley start to have some success, and a lot of it early on in that game on Thursday night against Seattle, after they were pretty stout all year long on the ground. So maybe now with Nick Chubb coming in here. I would expect probably lower ownership on him if I had to guess where he's sandwiched. I actually think I'm going to like it in GPPs. I'm going to have some exposure there. And if they get back to 12 personnel, it could be just another smash spot game. I just think that Freddie Kitchens is going to be very reluctant to want to run his offense that way.
Yeah, I think so too. What would you say if you had to grade this after 5 weeks, the Seattle defense in both phases, run defense and pass defense? And I'll just set you up right now. I think they've been pretty decent, but they're pass rush, they rank pretty much towards the bottom. According to Pro Football Focus, they rank, where do they rank in coverage here? 20th in coverage, but it feels like they've been a lot better recently. And then run defense, Seattle ranks 4th. So that's where they've really been able to slow opposing teams down. Would you put them middle of the league, upper half of the league, bottom half, when you're evaluating players against them?
So taking it like from a running game perspective to a passing game, I think their run defense is their strong point on defense for sure. And we saw Todd Gurley have success coming into last week. But before that, they were stopping some pretty solid running backs, whether it was holding Chris Carson down, or not Chris Carson, holding Alvin Kamara down to a decent amount, holding for the most part David Johnson in that matchup, James Conner week 2, Joe Mixon week 1 battling an injury. So I think where they're a little bit maybe phony, and I think Griffin, an outside cornerback, is their best player in the secondary, but where they're a little bit phony comes their passing attack. So week 1, they got torn apart a little bit. Then they go to Pittsburgh and they benefit from having to play Mason Rudolph and mop up Dooney. Then they go and they play the Saints against Teddy Bridgewater, who puts up points on them. And when he has to move the ball, he does. Their one spot where they looked good was against Kyler Murray in a game where he was just getting sacked left and right. So it's still early in the season to just judge so many defenses. But I think the way that you attack them more times than not is through the secondary, which is concerning, I would say, for Nick Chubb. But we did start to see glimpses last week of their run defense just kind of falling apart. But there are so many good players up front for them, whether it's Wright, whether it's Bobby Wagner, and Wilkinson. So there's just a lot of guys up there that I think you attack them through the air. But if you're the Browns, you've had success through 12 personnel. So it's an interesting way to script this game and really game plan for it.
Okay. Working our way a little bit further down the list here. You've got Leonard Fournette, who we've said it almost every week. Just the amount of time this guy spends on the field is crazy. It's almost like, in a way, he's the poor man's Christian McCaffrey, because now he's involved in the passing game too. Not as much, of course, but we saw it last week. These two squared off against each other, and while Christian McCaffrey, nearly doubled Fournette's production, or he did double his production, Fournette still had another really good game, and he's done it twice in a row now. He has 52 carries and 10 targets over his last 2 games. 62? You're looking at 30 plus total looks per game over that span. 23 looks game before that, 21 before that. Like, he is always going to be involved. But New Orleans' run defense has been very stout. Is Leonard Fournette at a price where, because of his workload, you're willing to look his way? Or would you rather go to an Ingram against Cincy, Le'Veon Bell, assuming Sam Darnold is back against Dallas, or a Chris Carson at 6K himself?
Yeah, relative to those guys, I think I'd rather save the money and go down. The only reason that I have interest is because of the volume. He runs like another 40-plus routes last week, and we know he's heavily involved. Like, his floor game so far this year in the receiving game was 4 fantasy points, which for a running back is pretty solid, especially when that's your floor. Leonard Fournette, the workload makes him right now a maybe on my list. He's a guy that I'll have some interest in. It's him and Nick Chubb that are sort of the interesting parts for me in the running back position above 6K. But I'm probably still going to favor some of those guys that you just said below them. Just better either matchups overall, or when you factor in the price tag, it seems better. And I think I said Wilkinson earlier for the Seattle, but what I meant was Quinton Jefferson.
Okay. Well, does Chris Carson stand out to you against Cleveland? The fumble, Pete Carroll has not decided to put him in the doghouse. As a matter of fact, he went and saw 22 carries against Arizona, then 27 against the Rams. Speaking of total touches, 26 and 29 over the last, or 28 over the last 2 games. I mean, even with Rashad Penny back, and we saw him active last week, Penny saw 6 carries, 2 targets. Chris Carson was the clear bell cow here. CJ Prosise, I think he scored, but really didn't do anything else. Yeah, he had 3 carries for 4 yards in a game that was well out of reach. Does Carson stand out to you at all here?
Yeah, he definitely does. I mean, we saw him play over 80% of the snaps in the game where Penny comes back. Penny plays the least snaps he's played all year. I don't know if some of that's short week. There's still some injury, but it just seems like Carson's their guy. And if we just go based off of what Vegas is predicting here from a game script, if this stays into a neutral environment in games where it's been neutral against the Browns defense, it's a spot where running backs have had success. We saw it last week, neutral tilted towards being very favorable or last night, really favorable for the 49ers. They get their running game going. Week 1, Derrick Henry has a good week. It's pretty much games that just turn completely sideways, like when the Browns played the Ravens and the Jets, where they've been able to stop the run for obvious reasons because the other team just doesn't run the ball. So if this game script stays favorable, I do like Chris Carson at that price tag. I think he's just wildly underpriced, and maybe wildly is the wrong word, but I would say $600 underpriced.
I don't think he should be cheaper than Mark Ingram.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you take into account that early in the season, the first game or two, we saw the passing role there. It's not like you're probably not going to see less than 3-4 targets, and that's probably the floor for Chris Carson, especially if he stays on the field for 80% of the snaps.
One guy that stands out to me this week, he really has not been impressive. There has not been much running room at all. There are certainly some concerns. There's no doubting that. But Devontae Freeman, this does feel like one of those weeks where he could put up solid numbers where they're not playing from behind. Freeman has run the ninth most routes among all running backs this season. You know, he is right up there with Kamara and Chris Thompson and tied with Le'Veon Bell, Alvin Kamara. Well, of course, Bell missed a game or they had a bye week, but Ezekiel Elliott. These guys are only a few, if not, several above him, which to me is pretty remarkable given his lack of overall production. But I think the tide could turn on this in a good matchup. He's going to play, at least I would assume, close to around 60% of snaps. Ito Smith will get his. He'll probably play 35, 40%. That's fine. But Freeman is still the go-to guy on this team. Arizona just is not potent enough offensively to flip the game script where Freeman won't be involved. His carries 11, 16, 12, and 11 over the last 4 games, but they played from behind against Houston, Tennessee, close against Indy, and that was a 16-carry game. And then against Philly, they just couldn't get anything against that run D. The line is not good. They're getting no push at the line of scrimmage, Sal. But I think Devontae Freeman still has some serious upside in a spot like this. What are your thoughts on the run game for Atlanta?
Yeah, I just have concerns around exactly what you say, the line.
Yeah, it's bad for sure.
Yeah, they've been able to hold up and really in the passing game, it's easier to hold up and bring some more protection, keep guys on the line. But in the run game, I think they're bottom 8 right now in pass or run blocking. And it's just a little bit of a concern. Yeah, if you get 60% of the snaps out of him, the biggest upside is what he's been doing in the receiving game.
Mm-hmm.
Last 2 out of 3 weeks, he's had success there. So if he does put something together now as a favorite on the road against Arizona, there's upside there. So the biggest piece for me, though, is I see Chris Carson at 6,000. It's really difficult for me to want to get to Freeman over Carson. But those are similar, or those are not similar, but those are types of decisions that could win GPPs. I would say that you have the passing game role for Freeman. If you get the running game going, which is something that they should probably be trying to do based on how these games have gone, but not to a wild extent. It's an okay spot, but I still think just in that price range, definitely prefer Carson. And right now I don't have interest in Freeman just because probably the price for the role.
All right. Yeah. Atlanta 25th in adjusted line yards, running back yards. As far as offensive lines go, they're 24th. I believe they've been stuffed at one of the highest rates too. Like 8th most. It has not been pretty for that team, but I guess the way I see it is if I'm stacking this game, I'm not going to be terribly afraid to potentially run back a Kyler Murray stack with Devontae Freeman. I think if there was ever one where he sees 20 carries, this could be it. And I think I like him a little bit more than you do. When we talk about the players beneath him, Mixon has come down to 5,500. And I don't even know what to think of this Baltimore defense anymore. That's a story for another time. But they've given up huge run game or huge production in the run game to Cleveland and Kansas City. Nothing to Arizona and Miami, but we know why. 77 yards to Pitt. They've kind of been a roller coaster ride when it comes to the run defense. What do you think of Joe Mixon here and really anybody else in the 5K range before we touch on the value?
Yeah, so Mixon, I originally like right away put him as a yes, and then just looking at the lines and stuff coming out, it's tough as a 12-point underdog,
Yep.
11 in some spots to really get behind that. He played a season high in snaps, 63%, barely edging out. I think 62% is what he previously played. And then you see him get over 100 yards combined. I was surprised he wasn't more involved in the receiving game in a game that they were trailing, which was maybe a little bit concerning. So just moving into this week, you're going to have to get chunk plays out of him in the receiving game. This Baltimore defense definitely worse in the secondary just due to injuries. The game against Nick Chubb, they had some injuries on the defensive line that seemed to be fully healthy come this week. We'll track the injury report. So Mixon became a no for me. I still have it as just a too cheap of a price point, even in the matchup, but really tough, almost a 2-touchdown underdog to want to get there. And then I would say not interesting this week because of the matchup against Tennessee, but Phillip Lindsay, I don't know how he's not touching the ball more. Last week, he doesn't even get the majority of snaps over Royce Freeman, but their offense, it was like night and day when Lindsay was on the field. They were moving the ball. He was a big piece. Why? Royce Freeman, it was just stalled drives. So we'll see if that changes moving forward. But 5K range, yeah, there's no real interest. I think Matt Breida looked fantastic last night, but game flow helps that a little bit. Tevin Coleman sees more touches on the ground, and I think you can get just better plays if you pay a little bit higher.
Yeah. By the way, maybe you mentioned this and I missed it. Do you know what running back leads the league in routes run?
I mean, I want to guess that it's Fournette.
It is Fournette.
Yeah, because he was tied, or he came in third last week, and then you saw McCaffrey play a little bit less snaps, and Fournette ran like 43 routes this past week. It was just insane.
It's crazy. It's really crazy. Let's get to the value here, and then we'll go to wide receiver. So, Chris Thompson, Adrian Peterson, Carlos Hyde, Tevin Coleman, Duke Johnson. These are just guys that I wrote down with preliminary research to look further into. With Peterson, the Skins are actually favored in this game, but he doesn't look like he's got much left. Faced a lot of tough matchups, though, and they've been playing with a negative game script every week outside of the first half of week one, where, of course, Darius Geis was healthy and Peterson wasn't even active. But let's start with the Washington run game first, and then we'll get through these other guys. What are your thoughts on the Washington run game?
Yeah, I mean, it's a matchup that you want to take advantage of every week versus Miami. There's nothing on this defensive line that anybody should be scared of. It's just where do you go? So you mentioned it. They've been playing in positive game scripts for Chris Thompson's skill set. He's seeing almost twice as many snaps as any other running back on the team. We don't really know what this game or this team looks like if they're ahead or if they're only trailing by 3 points for the majority of the game or something along those lines. So can you get 12 carries out of Adrian Peterson? Sure. I don't know how much more they go. You do have Wendell Smallwood, only played about 18-20% of the snaps last week, but saw 6 carries. I just think there's too much in this backfield still for me to want to get to one of them. Chris Thompson, I guess, would be the one just because more times than not, I think he'll be on the field. But yeah, it's not a backfield that I want to get to. I don't think the price tags are honestly cheap enough on Adrian Peterson, because what I see from Adrian Peterson is, we all know, just touchdown dependence. If he has 14 carries in this game, and if you told me you were projecting him for that much, I would say it's a little high, but even then I don't have that much interest.
I have a little bit more than you do for a couple of reasons. The first one being that this passing game, no matter who's at the helm, whether it's Colt McCoy, Case Keenum, Dwayne Haskins won't be the starter, but throw him out there too, is dreadful, flat out dreadful. And then does this mean that Xavier Howard is going to be on Terry McLaurin? I mean, I don't know if that's the case, but he's no stranger to shadowing players, and that would take easily their best weapon in the passing game out of it. Pro Football Focus doesn't have it as a shadow situation right now, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he was lined up with him more than anyone else. And interim head coach Bill Callahan says that he wants the Redskins to focus on the run. Normally, I'd look at that and scoff, Sal, but this is actually one of those games where if you wanted to do that, you could. So I actually Do I think these are going to be some of my highest owned running backs? No, certainly not. But I could see Adrian Peterson with a 100-yard game and a touchdown at this price, and I'd be okay with it. I just think Miami's offense is bad enough to where Washington will look to run the ball a lot, and they will actually, for the first time in a while, hopefully be in a situation where they can do that. So
Yeah.
that's my counter on that. Let's see here.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I think when it comes down to it, it's like confidence in Peterson himself. And then for me, I think one thing that stands out is just how much of an impact do you think Wendell Smallwood has? Is it just 3 carries? Is it 8? Because that's obviously huge for what type
Yeah,
of
that dude
game.
stinks.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, you know what though, I wouldn't be surprised if, again, assuming it's a positive or neutral game script, and it's hard to think it wouldn't be, but crazier things have happened. I wouldn't be surprised if they ran the ball 30 times or more.
Yeah.
Like if they ran it 35 times, 20 to Peterson, like 8 to Smallwood, and 7 to Thompson, it would not surprise me. But my point is, I like Peterson more than Thompson because even though Thompson's pass catching abilities are an extension of the run game, I don't think it'll be needed nearly as much as it is in all these games where they're playing with from behind. So, what are your thoughts on Tevin Coleman against the Rams? He saw Matt Breida was the story last night, but Breida only saw 11 attempts, and Tevin Coleman in his first game back after being sidelined since week 1. He saw 16 carries, 97 yards, 6.1 yards per carry. Wasn't involved in the passing game, but wasn't really needed there. Any interest in a discounted Coleman?
Yeah, definitely discounted because of what we saw. Just the salaries already coming out. Yeah, he's the guy in San Francisco that I would have interest in. I think Matt Breida is definitely the better pass catching back, but that doesn't mean Coleman's not good in that department. He is. We saw it in Atlanta. So 4,400. He originally came in as like a maybe. An X is how I mark it for me. I switched it to a no for now, but this is a spot as a road underdog where if you're going to get to him, you need to see probably some passing game work. And I'm just concerned that you still see sort of a 40-40 split with him and Breida, and then Mostert finds his way in there for 20% of the reps. So the price tag is the most appealing based on the overall usage for Coleman out of that backfield. So I'm going to see where I end up on Thursday with it, maybe run some crunches. I'm kind of like on the fence about liking it, but you're definitely getting a $600 price tag discount at least.
All right. Let's get to Duke Johnson and Carlos Hyde. This is a really good spot. And we can get into the injuries on the line for Kansas City. They'll surely make a difference. But, right now, run defense, they rank 31st in the league. Actually, let me update this and see if that's changed. No, it's still 31st in the league. Their pass defense has been respectable enough, but Kansas City has been absolutely tormented in the run game. We saw it last week. Like we said earlier, the time of possession game killed them. It killed them because they couldn't get the defense off the field. What are you doing with Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson?
Man, yeah, this is an interesting spot. So a lot of it's going to come down to what this defensive line for Kansas City looks like come Sunday, really, and really later in the week once we get practice reports. But Carlos Hyde tied with Mark Ingram for the highest success rate on the slate, which is crazy. Now that doesn't automatically lead to loads of fantasy points, but in terms of how good he has been running on first, second, and third down situations, he's setting his team up for favorable down and distance, which usually means you're running well. And he has been for the most part first few weeks and then last week. So I still think I prefer Duke Johnson just because if you're playing it in look, neither of these guys you probably don't want to cash, but if you're playing it from a tournament perspective, you play it as, at least the way that I would look at it, you can correlate it with the quarterback of the team, Deshaun Watson. They're going to be underdogs coming into this game, and I like that. But yeah, you mentioned it. Like this defense is already bad. Now 2 defensive line injuries. Both these guys are going to be interesting. It probably leans, if I had to guess, in this game, closer to 50-50 than like the 60-40 splits we've been seeing. So it just kind of gets to the point where if I'm playing it in a tournament, I'd probably go to Duke Johnson for what seems like a higher ceiling. But man, Carlos Hyde, guy who just was getting ragged on nonstop in the preseason. Maybe you saw everybody on Twitter. He's been playing well.
He's been playing really well, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that right now on Tuesday, I think he's cash viable.
Oh wow, there we go.
I do, man.
Yeah, the price tag definitely helps. I mean, when you consider what, like, you would expect 15 carries on the ground, especially if those guys are out.
Yeah, I would. I mean, look, I'm not projecting him for 20 carries, right?
Yeah.
I'm not doing that. But he has 73 carries through 5 games, which means he's averaging 15 carries per game. And I think what I like about this the most is Kansas City is favored, but 5 points. The game has a 54.5 total. Houston 24.8 implied total. You can't tell. Bill O'Brien has, and I know you feel the same way. Some of the decisions this guy makes are really mind numbing, right? And it drives me crazy. But at the same time, you can't look at what Indianapolis did to the Chiefs and say you can't look at it and be like, that's not a recipe for success. You know, Sammy Watkins, Tyreek Hill being out, of course that makes a significant difference. But you have to look to establish the run against the Chiefs because keeping the ball out of Mahomes' hands is what's most important. Even though time of possession can be stupid anyway, when you're a guy like Mahomes and you only need 3 plays to go 85 yards. But I think there are a couple. Let me put it to you this way too. 180 rushing yards for Indy, right? That game they won 19-13. Detroit, 186 rushing yards. They lost that game, but they were every bit as competitive through 4 quarters as any team could be against this team this season. And then with teams like Oakland, they still had 129 rushing yards. That game was over from the jump. And Baltimore, 5-point game. I'd say Kansas City was in control, but Mark Ingram, if I recall correctly, had 3 touchdowns. So there's just like everything about this matchup stands out. And then if they're missing guys on the line, Sal, it becomes even more appealing from a running back standpoint.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like the point of just seeing what's already happened and also trying to keep Mahomes off the field as well. Yeah, you could probably project it for 15 with passing game work, maybe 16 and a half touches for this game. And yeah, I'll probably have to look into it more. I just feel I'll look into it more, especially for cash games. But Duke Johnson's probably still where I go for tournaments just because I feel like there's a higher correlation with Duke Johnson in a higher scoring game, but that actually might not be right. So I'll look into this more.
Oh, I mean,
it's definitely interesting.
By the way, I'm by no means not saying I don't like Duke Johnson. I do.
Right.
I've been on him each week trying to catch that lightning in a bottle, at least having a little bit of exposure to him because there will be that game where he puts up big numbers. But I think only 5-point dogs. I wouldn't be surprised to see this game stay close. It'll also be interesting to see what Sammy Watkins' status is and what Tyreek Hill's status is because the less passing options that they have in Kansas City, the more difficult it's going to be for Mahomes to sustain drives, even though he is incredibly good. So, all right, anything else at running back for you, Sal?
No, that's all I have on it.
I think we hit on a lot. It's a deep position, though, from top to bottom.
I agree.
What about wide receivers starting at the top with Julio, Michael Thomas, DeAndre? You know what? Screw it. Let me change the question. Julio Jones and DeAndre Hopkins have had a tough go of it recently. Manny Laura and I broke it down yesterday on the strategy show, which if you missed it, by the way, start checking out the Monday show. We're doing the screen share with it now so we can break down the Millie Maker lineups. We'll go over our lineups and go over how we did. Of course, what went right, what went wrong, the top lineups, the perfect optimal lineups. We break all of that down, the top producers, everything, and really get you a nice rewind or a recap for everything in the previous week. So check that out, youtube.com/awesemo. It's the strategy show week 5 recap. But we talked about, Manny did at least, how he's going to have to start adjusting Jones and Hopkins if this continues because teams are taking them away, taking them out of the game as much as possible and making guys like Fuller, making guys like Hooper, making guys like Darren Fells beat them. And they're okay with, selling out to stop 2 of the best receivers in the game. Do you see this continuing in week 5 or week 6 for both of these guys or not?
Yeah, I would say it probably continues more for Julio, but it's just something that he's been dealing with his whole career. So I don't think it completely suppresses him, but I mean, if you're going to say beat us with Will Fuller and then he just does exactly what he did, it's going to be really tough to continue to kind of go that route. especially if you're Kansas City, who doesn't have a cornerback that can just say, oh, I'm going to put this guy on Will Fuller and feel confident in a double team on DeAndre Hopkins. So coming into this week, I have more interest in Hopkins. I do agree, though, like when these guys are going to project out for 20, 19 fantasy points, and you're going to just end up getting to a lot of them, like manually bumping some things is definitely comes in play. And I've done it with other players. Like last week, Keenan Allen, he was just projecting out way too well, and I had to manually go in and bump it down to lower exposure. But I think I like both of these guys this week. I favor them as of right now over Michael Thomas, but not by much. And I have Hopkins over Julio. I think Julio is going to be the guy who continues to see the double coverage, and teams have been doing it all year long. Julio has beat them, but that's why I really do think that Sanu so far has had a solid start, and Austin Hooper's been having a career year because there's just so much more in the middle of the field when you play Atlanta now.
Yeah. Now, you say you put one above the other, but do you love either of these guys this week?
I like Hopkins a good amount. That game, I mean, the environment, I imagine a lot of those pieces are going to be extremely chalky. But if we stack it up, it'll help lower that. But when I get to it, both these games are the two best on the slate from a game environment, it seems. And you get a decent, significant, almost $600 discount on Hopkins. So I do like Hopkins this week in this matchup. And I think Fuller, just doing what he did last week, is going to actually at least have to change some defensive game plans moving forward. Because, I mean, he was just torching Trufant, I believe it was, in that secondary.
Yeah, what's going on with Desmond Trufant?
Yeah, it's a drop off year so far. But again, I mean, it's so hard to judge like 3 or 4 or 5 games into
for
a season.
Sure.
Yeah, I feel like we have just every 2 or 3 games narratives are crazy. Like the Dallas Cowboys looked like a 16-0 team after 3 weeks and just things like that. But
yeah,
if you look at like individual player play, like losing steps and stuff, it's hard to quantify it. But yeah, he's just been getting roasted. Now Will Fuller probably like one of the faster players in the league, so no disrespect there. But like in the previous weeks, it's been sort of the same thing.
Yeah, Sheldon Trott asked in YouTube chat, what's a good Miami stack? Well, Sheldon, the best Miami stack is no stack at all, my friend.
There you go. Yeah, I would, if you're going to go there, I think there's like maybe one individual piece, but yeah, that's about it.
I mean, look, we both have talked a lot about Preston Williams. We like him. And Devontae Parker continues to rack up the air yards for any of you that are interested in that stat. But the way I see it is when you're stacking a team like this, number one, you'd like to run it back with someone from the other team. Who's that going to be? You know, AP? Is it going to be McLaurin, which could be fine, you know, and I still think he's in play. But really, even if they have a decent game, what is the probability? What's the likelihood that, you know, a Rosen, Williams, Parker stack wins you a tournament?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we saw last week with like last year with like Brock Osweiler or something, but it's really tough now because the team this year is, whether it's offensive line play, whether it's everything on it, just so much less skilled. So it's tough. You could find your pieces, and like you're really lucky if one guy pays off his salary on that offense. It's the ideal matchup to do it. But yeah, I mean, stacking Miami, I don't think is the greatest advice that I want to be out here recommending.
Right. One guy that stands out to me in the 6K range, and then if there's anyone else between that 6 to 7 that you want to talk about, is Tyler Boyd. It's been a tough go being able to keep Andy Dalton off of his own ass. But check out these notable slot performances. I'm going to throw this out on Twitter too. Against the Ravens this season. They are impressive, no question. It just comes down to, can we get him the ball? So Jarvis Landry, 154 yards out of the slot. That led the entire league that week. McCole Hardman and Sammy Watkins, 167 combined yards. And then Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk, 160 combined yards from the slot. Tyler Boyd has the 6th most yards in the league out of the slot with 280. They have just been absolutely tortured in the slot this week or this season. It'll be interesting to see what the injury situation looks like for Baltimore, but this has been a huge sore spot for them and really one of the biggest weaknesses of their defense.
Oh yeah. I mean, Tyler Boyd is just, I don't know how he's this cheap still. So you mentioned it. I was looking at similar stuff. Yeah. The Ravens slot cornerback play has just been terrible. And it's to be expected when a guy you have a lot of stock in and expectations and really just a solid slot cornerback in Tavon Young goes down before the season starts. And now you're scrambling and playing musical chairs with the slot cornerback. And now you have Tyler Boyd, who on this slate is top 5 in just overall targets a game, over 10 per game. He's just converting those targets so well. 70% catch percentage on the field nonstop. And yeah, like you said, he's in the slot on more than 2/3 of his routes. So Tyler Boyd at 6,300, it's just too cheap, especially when he's having solid games. Like the floor on Tyler Boyd is just fantastic. Like last week in the first half, I was looking at it, the whole team was doing terrible. Second half comes out, Tyler Boyd catches like 6 balls in 2 drives. It's just, that's Andy Dalton's guy. And you have to keep in mind, John Ross still not there. Boyd just didn't come off the field playing almost, I think, close to 100% of the snaps last week. It's a really good matchup at 6,300 early on Tuesday. It's a spot that I'm sort of circling on some of my stuff and marking in green, like going out of my way to kind of prioritize. So I think the matchup is really good. And the points that just Baltimore secondary in general have been giving up, not even out of the slot, just in general, it's rough. Jimmy Smith not trending anywhere to be back soon. Jefferson, they just put on IR. Like this secondary is beat up everywhere. So Tyler Boyd, even Auden Tate, but Tyler Boyd being the main guy here that stands out at a low 6K price tag.
That Tony Jefferson injury, I think, is going to loom large on this defense.
I agree.
And make them even worse than they were in the secondary. What else do you have here? You got Kupp, you've got Amari, Beckham, Adam Thielen against Philly. That could be a very good spot. Tyler Lockett. Anything else above 6K?
Yeah, so Kupp stands out. San Fran not nearly as bad in the slot, but if you're going to pick San Fran apart in one spot on defense, which has looked pretty solid through 4 games now, it is the slot. Week 1, Godwin had success, over 50 yards and a touchdown. Week 2, Tyler Boyd goes for over 122 yards on 10 catches. Week 3, Juju over 80 yards and a touchdown. And then last night, although the offense was terrible, the only guy to actually catch balls was Jarvis Landry, 4 in the first half, and then the offense just shuts down in the second half. So Kupp's in a good spot. I would say a little bit concerns and want to look into it more on why he only played 67% of the snaps on Thursday night. I know they were trying to run early in that game, but it seems like a lot to be going down. And I know in the first half, he just wasn't on the field for some of those rotations. I don't know if it was something in terms of an injury or something flaring up. But as long as he's all good, $7,100 Kupp, leading the league in targets right now. All the talk of the town was the first 3 weeks, Keenan Allen. Through 5 weeks, Cooper Kupp is the most consistent wide receiver out there. So a lot of interest in him in what seems like a positive matchup. And yeah, both these Minnesota guys, if you're going to have confidence in saying that this is a 35-plus pass attempt game for Kirk Cousins, it's really hard not to like them.
I agree with you, man. I think Thielen stands out. Diggs stands out. I will look towards this team as a stack. Who I run it back with is another story. And that might be one of the reasons that I don't have a ton of love for it. Like, this isn't one of my favorite games, but I have tepid interest in it for sure, at least early on. What do you make of the 5K options here? This is where a lot of times you can find some really good value, or you find yourself overpaying. Talked about Diggs for a moment. He's 59, but is there anything here, Calvin Ridley, Robert Woods against the San Fran defense that, in my opinion at least, looks very legit? Gallup against the Jets. Willie Snead is 5,500. That's wild. DJ Chark, 55. He's had a monster season. Anything here? Any of the Kansas City bodies in the wide receiver core stand out?
Yeah, so Kansas City, really got to see. I don't know. I think I have less confidence in Watkins actually playing, but I have to see what Watkins and Tyreek Hill moving forward look like. But I mean, if both those guys are out, yeah, Robinson at 59, just the players in this game in general at wide receiver become a lot more attractive, and they're all probably too cheap. But things that stand out in the 5K range for me, those Jacksonville receivers. I mean, I think Dede Westbrook is in a fantastic spot against PJ Williams. We've been saying for 12 straight games now. You saw what Godwin did to him last week. Dede Westbrook coming off of his best game of the season where he had a favorable matchup. So I like Dede. And then if I decide to right now kind of on the fence about DJ Chark and his matchup with Lattimore, but if I like that, it's just going to lead to more Jacksonville stacks for me. So I think both Jacksonville receivers are interesting. I think Gallup's price tag is a little too low. The concern is that they're 8.5, 9-point favorites. So it might not be as needed in the passing game. If Darnold does play, my interest in Gallup will go up slightly. And then I just have some question marks by players. Ridley has a question mark by him because I still think he's too cheap, but do I really want to get there after he just had a good game last week and feel a little bit chasey? But really just Jacksonville receivers, Gallup if Darnold plays, and Landry's price tag I just still feel like is too low, but it's not a priority.
Okay. What about some discounts? I did talk about someone like Terry McLaurin, but he's no longer cheap. He's come out to $6,000, which I don't know, seems a bit much on a slate like this. You still need someone to throw you the ball, and I don't know who it's going to be. Below 5K though, and is there Like, by the way, I'm a huge DK Metcalf guy. I love what I've been seeing from him. I think he's going to have a 2 touchdown game pretty soon, but he's not getting enough volume. Auden Tate, his price has come up, but it is Baltimore. Can we go there? It seems sketchy. What do you have here? Any value that you like early on in the week?
Yeah, so you say Auden Tate, and he played 100% of the snaps. Baltimore secondary is all beat up, like we were just saying, but the one piece that's there is Marlon Humphrey, and we have Auden Tate playing in the slot a good amount, so maybe Humphrey is just going to be put on the outside. He normally, if he shadows, is on the outside, but it doesn't seem like a matchup where you have to worry too much about shadowing. But he will face Marlon Humphrey for a part of this game, a lot less than Tyler Boyd in the slot will, so it gives me pause there. But he was on the field a ton. The spots that are below 5K that stand out to me are at the lower end. Preston Williams, I'll keep going back to it coming out of a bye in a beneficial matchup. I still think he's too cheap. Last 3 weeks, leading the team in targets as well as just snaps in general. Now, albeit targets from Josh Rosen on this team, not great, but again, the matchup looks good. But if Sam Darnold is back, and this is really going to shift a lot of things.
He is back. Officially,
he is back.
He's playing this week, yeah.
Did they say that? Oh, okay, so I missed that.
Just came out like 20, 30 minutes ago.
Oh, okay, so okay. The fact that he's back now gives me more interest in overall just team and game stacks from that game. Robbie Anderson and Crowder both at 4K, both too cheap for a Dallas secondary that we'll watch throughout the week, but they're still expecting 1 to 2 weeks without their best safety, Xavier Woods, and then they put Frazier on IR 2 weeks ago. So they're down their top 2 safeties. You really didn't get to see that because the Packers only completed 4 passes to wide receivers last week. But I like that Jets wide receiver core now. I'd rank it Anderson, then Crowder, and now have more interest in Gallup just because the game has a chance of staying closer.
Want to talk some tight ends here?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Hey, by the way, awesemo.com/join is how you can check out what we offer over at this site. I think you'll enjoy it. But we want to give you 50% off your first month of all access Awesemo Plus membership. If you sign up using the sign-up code, the promo code NFL Strategy, all one word. Very simple. Just go to awesemo.com/join. And we've got it all set up for you so you can see exactly what you're joining, exactly what you get with this package. We don't want you to fly blind into any of this. So we've got, videos, articles, everything showing you what tools you'd be getting with video here. Like, look, you go to awesemo.com/join. Again, fantasy point projections, click play on that. You see what you're working with, ownership projections, the lineup builder, Awesemo's picks, premium Slack, all of it. We've got videos. We want you to know exactly what you will be buying. And if you do want to check it out, you get 50% off your first month. Use the sign-up code NFL Strategy for everything we've got behind paywall. You got the Fantasy Cruncher add-on as well, where you can crunch lineups, do lineup rewind, lineup study, all of that great stuff. So NFL Strategy is the sign-up code, all one word, over at awesemo.com/join. And if you're just looking to dip your feet in, we got a weekly membership starting as low as $3.95 per week. So check that out as well. All right. Tight end position last week was a disaster, really. 16 fantasy points was the best production, and that was Ertz, who you would have overpaid for based on his results. Kelsey is way more expensive than any other tight end. I want to talk about Ertz first, and here's why.
Yeah.
Teams with Deshaun Jackson out, teams are just doubling Zach Ertz. Like that is what's happening, man. It happened against Detroit. Green Bay did it a lot. The New York Jets took him out of the game for the most part, even though he scored. I worry that Ertz's ceiling right now is less than we would prefer because of what opposing teams have done with Deshaun Jackson off the field.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that the price makes it a little bit easier to get there just because it's Travis Kelce and then everybody's cheaper.
I'll play anyone at the right price for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's the concern. We saw it again last week. I thought we would see less because Green Bay did it less than we saw the week before, but they still did it. And then we saw it last week, just Zach Ertz getting double team, finding his way at the end of that second quarter to get in the end zone. But yeah, I still think I like the price point. We're about to talk about some guys that people in the chat are referring to as a free square.
I just like Kittle a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's fair too. Like this is a very tight and cheap second tier of tight ends, I guess you can say, behind just pricing wise, Kelsey. So I have interest in Ertz right now. I think Minnesota's defense in general against tight ends is a little bit inflated due to a couple of really poor tight ends they've played. The good tight ends that they've played have had solid games, Hooper, Waller for the most part. And yeah, it's a spot where I have interest right now. He is one of 4 guys that I have marked as a yes, along with, I imagine, the guys that we're going to say next.
Who did they mention as a free square?
Austin Hooper is what I think I saw.
Okay. Yeah. Uh, I don't know. I never think a tight end is a free square unless it's like a cheap Kelsey. I don't know. Maybe I'm in the minority here. Let's get into it now. But I would take George Kittle here. Oh, okay. By the way, the reason everyone's mentioning Hooper as a free square is because how how badly Arizona has performed against opposing tight ends this season. I get that. Leave it to Tyler Eifert to snap that trend, right? But
Yeah.
I like Austin Hooper. I just want to talk about Kittle first.
Yep.
The market share of targets, and I tweeted this before yesterday's game, for wide receivers this season on this team is really, really underwhelming. Kittle, however, has a 26% market share of targets among everyone on this team. Look, just to put it in context, 15% for Deebo Samuel. That leads all receivers. And then 11% for Marcus Goodwin. Dante Pettis is at 8%. Kendrick Bourne is at 9%, right? That Breida and Juszczyk at 9% as well. There's really nobody that actually sees the volume even close to what Kittle sees. So they're going to look to run the ball for sure, but they won't be able to as much against the Rams, who will go up against the stout 49ers defense, but I think still put points on the board. To me, Kittle hasn't been great this season. Yesterday was encouraging, but I think this could be the big Kittle game we've been waiting for.
Yeah, I like that. And I think, again, I always try and say this. You take the wide receiver tag off, or the tight end tag off him, 5,200 for Kittle's production. You say the target share and all that is insane. And yeah, San Fran right now, they're running 5 wide receivers through their rotation. They're running 3 running backs. There's just so much talent on the field. And in theory, what Shanahan's doing is just getting the best matchups. And it makes sense. Like, if you're a fantasy person, you hate what's happening, but they only have 1 tight end. Kittle's been dominant. He's running out of the slot a ton. And I think at 5,200, yeah, way too cheap. But also, like, it seems like he's underwhelming this season, but there's context. Week 1, 2 touchdowns called back on 2 gimpy calls. Week 2 gets pulled in the fourth quarter because they're blowing out a team. Week 3, he goes like 5 catches, 70 yards. So not a terrible week by any means. Then he has a bye. So does what he does yesterday. He hasn't had a lot of opportunity based on a bye, based on being pulled early in a game. And when he has done well, it's his own team hurting him. So I think his price tag, if those 2 touchdowns stand, right? If he plays the whole fourth quarter in that game before, it's probably $6K, somewhere close to that. So yeah, I think I like Kittle. I want to see what the ownership is. If people just overestimate like the matchup against Arizona's defense, which yeah, they gave up touchdowns to tight ends. Maybe that's a little bit variant, but their defense in general is terrible, like across the board. If they do that and what I expect to be like a close to 20% owned Austin Hooper or something, and Kittle's just flying under the radar at 10%, then it's going to be real easy to just get to a ton of Kittle because the price tag doesn't hurt you at all. It's $200 more.
Sal, if chat is any indication of what ownership is going to look like, my God, yeah. Austin Hooper is going to be 106% owned this week.
And here's the thing, like, I like Austin Hooper this week. I think it's a good matchup.
Yeah, it's a great spot.
Yeah, he's seeing a lot of targets, snaps, everything's solid. The way that they're taking Julio out favors him and Ridley, but him as well in the middle of the field. But here's the thing, like, Hooper's not 4,300 this week. He's not $4,000.
It's the same price as Kittle.
So, yeah, so you're getting a player that is seeing the same snaps or close to his Kittle, seeing more targets by 1, but he's also priced the same. So it's a little bit different than just saying, well, I'm getting him for 3,800. This is a smash play. It's a really good matchup, but Kittle's overall matchup is probably just as good. And then when the ownership comes into account, it might be the point that tilts it a little bit.
Yeah, and people will make the argument, of course, that Hooper, as you mentioned, targets and snaps and all that in production, because of that, he deserves to be this price. Yeah. By the way, you want to go back, I am the original Austin Hooper truther. So I don't need any of that crap, man. Spare me the Austin Hooper.
Brett, cut that one up, Brett. Get that one out there.
That's right. I am, man. I'll go back and find it on a Sirius XM show where they said, here's why Laffy loves Austin Hooper. This was last year. Said he's only going to get better. So spare me your Austin Hooper love and shame because I've been there. All right. But yeah, of course, I think Austin Hooper's a great play. Here's all I'm saying. Let's say Hooper is like 25% projected ownership. Might be a little high, but let's just say that. and Kittle is 10.
Ooh.
Usually I don't let ownership sway things dramatically, but I also think that Kittle could just have a huge game here. So I like them both. I like both of them quite a bit. If I
Yeah.
were to put it in order, I would say Kittle, then Hooper, then Ertz. Kittle and Hooper interchangeable, but ownership could help sway my decision. Quick thoughts on Travis Kelce for you, Sal?
Yeah, Travis Kelsey is a guy that I'll have the same exposure to. So here's the thing with tight ends, and I guess I'll keep it to Travis Kelsey right now. Great game environment, has been producing well, just not finding the end zone. So by his standards, not as well. The price point's not changing for a guy who isn't getting in the end zone, and this team overall isn't getting in the end zone. So I'm going to be lower on him because of Kittle, Hooper, a little bit of Ertz. So lower on him than I usually am because I think the price tag should be coming down to the 6K range now based on how he has been. I know what the ceiling is, but it hasn't been shown, and indications are that defenses are starting to play the defense or are starting to play him and Patrick Mahomes a little bit differently and taking away what that ceiling is, not completely, but more often than he saw it last year. So those are my thoughts. I'll have some, but not he probably won't be my highest on tight end.
Okay. A couple people said, would you play Hooper and Ertz together or Hooper and Kittle together? I haven't made lineups yet, but it honestly doesn't sound like the craziest idea because, in my opinion, Kittle's underpriced.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like the craziest idea. I guess so like my stance on the two tight end thing is maybe a little bit different than others, but I like it, but I like it depending on how many lineups you're putting in. Like nobody wins the Millie or these tournaments with it because only 0.1% of people are doing it. So you're never going to find those winning lineups because not a lot of people are doing it. But relative to how many people are doing it, you probably have a really good advantage the week that it is needed because, again, nobody's doing it. So I actually like the strategy of it. It's different. And yeah, these are two tight ends that Kittle definitely 20 plus point upside. And we've already seen Hooper do it. So it fits the build and they're both cheap. I just don't get there with a lot of frequency, but you don't have to for that to work.
Right. What do you think about the rest of the position? I'm just going to let you dive right into it, Sal, because we don't need to get like deep into the weeds with the sub 3K guys. But
Yeah.
I think we hit on the more expensive ones, and now you start to fall into the Disleys and the Andrews and the Walkers and the Everetts coming off. He made a couple bad mistakes, but all in all, he had a huge game and showed his athleticism off like crazy. Talk to me about everyone else below the 5K range.
Yeah, so I think Disley is interesting, really close. He'll probably get not that much ownership. He played over 85% of the snaps, and they schemed for him. It wasn't even just like he was out there. Like they were making scheme plays for Tyler Lockett, Carson, and Will Disley. It seemed like that was all. So based just on fantasy point per target, he's been dominant, heavily aided by touchdowns. But I like him. If he's going to be very low owned, I'll have small exposure. Nothing crazy, but he's actually being split out wide, put in the slot, used the way that some of these other tight ends are, but also priced like it. So then going down below, it drops off. I like Chris Herndon, but right now Adam Gase is saying I have to see what he looks like conditioning-wise before activating him. It wasn't an injury. It was just suspension, so I assume he will be active. That's a good price point now that Darnold's back to have Chris Herndon back. I actually have a lot of interest in Chris Herndon if he officially becomes active, which I expect. Mark Andrews and then Gerald Everett are the other two people that I have on here as slight interest, but just based on all the other names we've said, probably don't have big exposure to them. So tight end, usually have a small player pool for it. Because it just gets a little bit wonky after some of the guys. So right now, Herndon, Hooper, Kittle, and Ertz are what I would expect to have the most exposure to if I was to do a crunch right now.
All right, so you're on the Herndon train, huh?
Yeah, I like it. If he comes back, and now that Darnold is back, I like it at that price tag. If he was 4,500, no, but 3,500 I do like for a guy who's going to be targeted down the field.
Okay, hey, and before we head out, let me ask you this, because we were talking about Kittle, looking at this Rams pass defense. Where would you rank this team? Because they obviously have some talented players in the secondary, right? I feel like they shouldn't have these spots where they just completely disappear, but it does happen sometimes. And I guess one of the reasons for that would be, Marcus Peters. Like Marcus Peters has always been a risk taker. But if you have Aqib Talib and Marcus Peters, you would think they'd be better. We've just seen them very up and down to start the season.
Yeah, so pretty much it's so similar to what we saw last year is that they look good at the beginning of the year, first 4 games, and then they fell apart. And right now, Peters, I think, is the one who's the most stable.
638 passing yards over the last 2 games allowed.
Ooh, exactly. Like, I think the first 3 games, they were in matchups that they just had some things hidden up, right? Like week 1, Cam Newton's now we know was playing injured. Week 2, Drew Brees leaves that game. So beneficial spots. And yeah, I don't think their passing defense is all that great.
I'm
I
with
do
you.
think I do think Marcus Peters is still like maybe slightly above an average to above an average cornerback, but Talib has just been terrible. Like since
Yeah.
midway last
And
year.
Peters takes a lot of risks.
Yeah, that's the big thing there is just gambling. If he was to take less risk, he would be a lot better. But I don't think this passing defense is that great, and I'm fine attacking with any players. Like it's not a spot, I guess you can say, where I would much rather stack against it than shy away because I'm playing the Rams defense.
All right. I know we don't really research for this, talking about defenses, but I can give you this, and then Sal, if you want to throw something in there, more than willing to listen. But looking at our, looking at the biggest favorites on this slate, this is one of the quickest ways to just take a cursory look at where your best options are. Baltimore Ravens, 12-point favorites at home. Andy Dalton, they can't keep him upright, so the sacks should be flowing there. Dallas, 9-point favorites against the Jets, although Sam Darnold expected back. I still think that game they'll be like 8 or 9-point favorites, even with Darnold. No other really huge favorites. I mean, then it goes from Kansas City, 5 points, Rams, 4.5. Nothing crazy there. It begs the question, would you look towards the Redskins as 3.5-point road favorites? Would you look towards Minnesota with the Eagles having a 20-point implied total? Are there any spots here for teams that, aren't big favorites, but have, favorable matchups against, like I said, the Jets? Well, he has a big favorite. They are Tennessee has an 18-point implied total, Miami 19, Philly 20, Denver 20.7. So there's not a ton here at defense.
Yeah, I mean, we get less teams on the slate. Like the defenses that I want to play are not on the slate. Like the Chargers at night against Devlin Hodges.
Yep, the Patriots.
Patriots, and then early in the morning, I would want to play this Panthers defense because offensive linemen, 2 more down for Tampa Bay. It's not on this slate, but one of them, I forget his name, like Alex Kappa. He played with a broken arm the entire game. He played from the first quarter on with a broken arm, but that's not on the slate. So yeah, defense, there's not much that stands out. Like I said, just like home favorites is what I target, or bad quarterback play. So that Washington-Miami game, yeah, both defenses probably have to be in play. It's a spot where I'm just like skimming through right now. You even get the Dolphins priced up at 2,700 because of it, but it makes sense, right? So yeah, defense, not something that I've looked into too much this week, but just home favorites. I do think that Jacksonville is an interesting defense. I think it's a really interesting betting spot. It's probably the one that makes me not scratch my head, but ponder the most. Jacksonville, a 1-point favorite at home against New Orleans and Teddy Bridgewater. If Jalen Ramsey is there, I feel a lot more confident getting to a $2,200 Jacksonville defense because I'm just somebody who will pay down for it. You'll find those guys like a Steelers defense, 2,100 last week, scores double-digit points, outscores most of the high-priced defenses. It's just so random that I'm going to more times than not pay down for like these Jacksonville defenses.
For sure. All right, man. Anything else before we head out of here? And I ask everyone that enjoys the show to hit us with a thumbs up and like the video if they want to help support us and see more of this free content at youtube.com.
Yeah, no, that's it. I think we covered a good amount for a Tuesday show and kind of set the table for Thursday.
All right. Well, that'll do it for us. Thanks as always for hanging out. Hit us with that thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you always know when content is going to drop next. Outside of that, if you're looking for some content, we have a lot coming up today. No basketball yet. I cannot wait for basketball to be back. No regular season basketball, but we do have preseason basketball content. I don't know if it'll be today because I haven't looked at the slate, but Fast Eddie Fear is behind paywall at awesomemode.com whenever there are these slates. Jake and Nolan have your NHL strategy today. And then tomorrow we'll be back with a whole lot more right here at awesomemode.com. We'll see you back here on the Strategy Show tomorrow. Chris Baggs and myself taking a first look at ownership for Week 6. Peace.